in Rangoon.
Certainly compared to, I think, the last week where tensions have been incredibly high, yes, the streets are eerily quiet today. Fewer cars and fewer people on the streets.
So are you expecting that perhaps something will happen, or do you think it's simmered down a bit?
There have been quite a lot of rumours about continued protests and demonstrations today, but it's very difficult to distinguish between rumour and fact at this stage.
Is there much anticipation surrounding the imminent arrival of United Nations Special Envoy Ibrahim Gambari?
The people I spoken to about it today, and of course they're based in Rangoon, where communications are better, but they certainly know of his visit, and there is quite a lot of expectation, yes.
There appears to be some concern for areas outside of Rangoon that may have been targeted by the military. Have you heard anything along those lines?
We haven't. We have, Save the Children has 35 offices around the country, and we have been in contact with them yesterday and many of them this morning. And there were some peaceful demonstrations that went off in a number of places yesterday, but there was no significant confrontations that we know about.
Okay, so how is your organisation then coping in terms of providing support and aid?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the humanitarian situation in this country has been bad for children for quite a long time. This is, and the current crisis doesn't really change things for the majority of people. But we continue to operate our 35 offices around the country, providing healthcare, education, and child protection. Obviously, we're monitoring the situation very carefully, so we don't put our staff in unreasonable danger. But at the moment, we're still able to implement all of our programs.
That was Andrew Kirkwood joining us from Rangoon. The United States has tightened sanctions against Burma's military regime as it faces growing international pressure to halt its violent crackdown. But while brute force may be working inside Burma's borders, there's little sign of a lessening of the protests by pro-democracy sympathisers around the world.
The more Burma's military crushes dissent with brute force, the more international outrage grows. Protests against the violent crackdown continue around the world. In London, Rome, Washington, Bangkok and Seoul, a global show of solidarity with Burmese pro-democracy protesters. A Burmese monk led this protest outside UN headquarters in New York. In Tokyo, demonstrators mourned the victims of the crackdown, including a Japanese photographer, Kenji Nagai, who was among those killed in Rangoon when troops opened fire on protesting crowds. Burmese state TV claimed his death was accidental.
He was accidentally killed while taking news, following along with the mob.
But these pictures show Nagai being shot apparently at point-blank range. Japan's government, one of Burma's biggest aid donors, has dispatched a senior official to Rangoon to seek an explanation. We're carefully weighing up our response, said Japan's new Prime Minister, Yasuo Fukuda. But sanctions are not the best step to take now. The US, however, is tightening sanctions on Burma's junta, slapping travel bans on senior military officials, on top of freezing their American-held assets. Washington also wants the UN Security Council to apply more pressure beyond sending a special envoy to Rangoon.
There needs to be immediately a stop to the violence against innocent people. And even though, as I said, we would have liked to have seen a stronger action by the Security Council, we do think that sending Mr. Gambari out is a very good step at this point.
Burma's Asian neighbours, who've been unusually critical of the regime's actions, are hoping the UN envoy's visit will force the generals to show restraint and open up a dialogue with democracy activists.
It's critical. We have to support him. If he fails, then the situation can become quite dreadful.
Many might argue it's already dreadful. Britain, like Australia, fears the death toll is far worse than reported and is urging the European Union to also impose sanctions.
That this will begin to make the Burmese regime see that this cannot continue. The eyes of the world are not only upon them, but the anger of the world is now being expressed.
China, 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 China,
China continues to face calls to use its influence and do more to pressure the Burmese regime to halt the bloody crackdown. Vesna Nasor, World News Australia.
Well, CNN correspondent John Vos is monitoring the situation from Thailand. And John, it sounds like things have quietened down in Rangoon. So where to now, do you think, for the protest movement?
Well, certainly this is normally around the time of day when we've been getting word of demonstrators taking to the streets. But what we're now hearing is there is this overwhelming security presence on the streets. It seems that the military government is determined to restore calm and take control ahead of the arrival of the special UN envoy sometime today. What is likely to happen is what we've been seeing is an ever-diminishing number of protesters taking to the streets, and it does appear that the army and the government, the military government, is getting the upper hand here, at least at the moment, Janice.
These protests began as demonstrations against fuel rises, but it seems now, of course, there's a bigger push for democracy and regime change. But is the military likely to buckle now that the international spotlight is on them?
Well, it's unlikely that any pressure on this military regime, this dictatorship, it will have any impact unless countries like China, Thailand and India are involved in that international pressure as well. What we're seeing is the United States taking the high road, imposing sanctions on the military dictatorship. But countries like China are still doing business with Myanmar, still pumping in hard currency into that military dictatorship, and that's propping up that government. So until China and India and other countries that continue to go into Myanmar or Burma, continue to exploit that country's vast natural resources, until they come on board with those sanctions, then it seems that that military dictatorship will continue to survive.
What do you think is the significance of the UN envoy's Ibrahim Gambari's visit?
Well, I mean, the fact that they're letting him in at this very difficult time is significant and would probably represent or give an indication that the military dictatorship in Myanmar is feeling the pressure, possibly from countries like China, which has been urging restraint on all sides. But it has to be said that this is really, in some parts, being overblown as a major achievement. The UN Special Envoy was heading there anyway in October. He was there last November. So this is not quite the break that some parties have been making out that it actually is.
John Vos, thanks for your time.